As we saw, international networks and partnerships are at the very core of the CERT strategy. Cyberspace is borderless and man-made, which makes for fascinating and challenging dynamics between state actors and multinational corporations. For our final session, I'd like to invite again our Director General, Mr. Yigal Unna, to discuss those dynamics. Alongside Yigal, I have the honor of inviting a distinct panel of leaders and experts from industries and government worldwide. I'll invite them one by one. Mr. Chris Krebs, Undersecretary for Homeland Security and Head of NPPD, United States of America. Mr. Kieran Martin, Director General, NCSC, United Kingdom. Mr. David Ko, Chief Executive, Cyber Security Agency, Singapore. Dr. Hugh Thompson, CTO of Symantec. Mr. Adam Philpott, VP, EMEA, McAfee. And Ms. Michal Braverman, CTO, Cloud and AI Security Division, Microsoft.
Good evening, everyone here. Really distinguished. 1, 2. Okay. Great. So, thank you for coming. A really unique team of visitors from abroad, from Israel, from. You can hear me without the mic, right? I'll shout. So, now it's okay, finally. Third, take number 3. So, we have here a really unique visitors from abroad, both from government, federal agencies, and from private sectors, big corporates, and from Israel also. So, I'll begin with the slide. With a short presentation of who we have here. First of all, in this order, Mr. Chris Krebs, congratulate him. He just formally approved as the Undersecretary of the NPPD of the Secretary of DHS, Department of DHS in the US federal government. Congratulations. Kieran Martin here, this is your, how many CYBERWEEKs you're attending already? Your third. The fourth you get a gold pass, gold member.
Lifetime membership.
Yes, already you gained it. Director General of our British equivalent, the NCSC, for how many? For 2 years?
Yeah.
Before the Directorate, and as we look up to him and to his agency and what they're doing in all the manners, active cyber defense and other issues, a close friend of Israel, of our Directorate. Mr. David Ko, I think along here, we don't need to present you, but still, the Commissioner of Cybersecurity, Chief Executive of the CSA, our Singapore equivalent, and also Deputy Secretary and the Defense Cyber Chief in the Ministry of Defense. Thank you for coming out. Mr. Adam Philpott, the VP of EMEA McAfee. We've met this morning with the Chris Young, the CEO. We met last week with Adam in Amsterdam, and we hope to hear tomorrow Chris Young, the CEO speech. McAfee, a very strong and powerful actor in the cybersecurity world today. Thank you for coming and joining us. Dr. Hugh Thompson, the CTO of Symantec. I hope that we seated you together. It's okay. Don't fight here. If you fight, Michal will separate between you. Joined the Blue Coat in 2012 and served as a CTO and CMO until the acquisition of Blue Coat by Symantec in August 2016. Thank you for joining us here. And last but not least, the lady here, Michal Braverman-Blumenstick, the CTO of Cloud and Artificial Intelligence Security Division in Microsoft. Michal team is driving the Microsoft security strategy and innovation prior to her promotion as CTO in September 2017, last year. Michal was the Azure Cybersecurity General Manager, where among other achievements, initiated the managed Azure Security Center, Microsoft leading hybrid security SaaS. Michal is a world-class expert in cybersecurity and a well-known speaker and a frequent member also of the CYBERWEEK events and of the cyber arena in Israel. Thank you for coming here. Our focus in this panel, in this event, is on the combination of how working federal governments and governments all with the corporates, with the private sector. Something that we also struggle and we try to find the right point. So here's the first question to you, Chris, in this order. What are the main challenges that you see between federal governments and corporates, and how to achieve a win-win situation in this manner? You have Mike here. Thank you.
So, does that work? Kind of. I'll just talk louder. First off, thank you for yeah. All right, I'll use that one. Better. Yeah. So thanks for having me today. Bear with me. I think I'm like 2 hours off a plane. Had time for a shower, and that's about it. I don't think I got the iron across the suit enough. But anyway. So look, the challenges, and I say this being one, right now, particularly from the United States perspective, one of the biggest challenges that I see in term, not the biggest, but across the range of challenges, it's working through kind of the stack of the company. We hit the board level, we hit the CEOs, we hit the security operators, everybody wants to work with us, and then there comes the general counsel. So this is not, I say this being a lawyer, these problems are not insurmountable. One of the things that we are working diligently on in the United States is working with the Federal Trade Commission, working with the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, working with some of the regulators to understand what the negative incentives are in the market that would prevent a general counsel from working with the federal government in partnership. So voluntary partnership is the model in the United States from a cybersecurity perspective. We tend to have particularly critical infrastructure protection. There's not a lot of regulatory mechanisms out there. So everything is voluntary. Voluntary always is, it's kind of a contractual model where you have to have something of value on one side to get the other party into the transaction. So as we work through that, we do have to go through the general counsels, working through the memorandum of understanding and other legal agreements. So what we have found is there is a promise ahead of us as we work through understanding what the value add of working with DHS is, which tends to be classified information, intelligence, higher level risk analysis that's cross-sector and cross-cutting, but also working with the regulators and saying, yes, if you work with DHS, if you work with the government on a risk assessment, on an information sharing platform, if that bad day comes, because it will come, so when that bad day comes, you will get some degree of deference in the regulatory action. So that to the extent that we can refine that, a couple of years ago there was a Department of Justice antitrust memo issued to financial companies that said, look, you can work together in things like the FS-ISAC and the financial services model. So those are the things that we're trying to do, is the full service, work internal to government to identify what the challenges are, and then work some of those pull some of the blockers down. What can we do to overcome those challenges?
Thank you. The line is try this.
Does that work?
Okay, well, first, thanks, Yigal, for the invitation, and congratulations to you on your new role. I think we're in 3 groups here. We've got the newly confirmed government leaders, we've got the oldies, because David and I have been around for far too long, and then we've got the people who have to sell things for a living. So there you go. Different perspectives. I think I agree with everything Chris said. In terms of government, speaking from someone who runs a government agency, I think I'm conscious of trying to do things that have some form of impact. So this is a $100 billion plus dollar global industry, brilliant technicians, voracious buyers in the market who want the best. So as government, when we intervene, it has to be doing things that the private sector are not doing or aren't able to do. And I think broadly speaking, there are 2 areas for us where that matters. One is just where the market doesn't quite work. So you mentioned our automated cyber defense program. So when we look at things like spoofing, where the institution that is spoofed doesn't suffer any detriment, so there isn't the same commercial incentive to act. What can government do there to promote standards, promote take-up of some of the automated ways in which we can reduce that social harm? It's not an individual or institutional harm, but it's a wider social harm. So how do we take that away at large scale? How do we create the conditions where, for example, you can stop the Mirai botnet taking root as a lead vector of attack through better coordination and using that forcing function of government? So that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is listening to the corporate sector about what they want and need. I agree entirely with Chris about, let's not over-legalise this. This isn't a new subject, but it's not a mature subject either, cybersecurity. So as it matures, we have fundamentally, for example, rejected, at least for now, 2 models. One is that we should become a regulator ourselves, because that would change the interaction of companies with us. And the other is we don't charge. There have been ideas floated. Now, maybe at some point in the future, governments might charge the corporate sector for elite government help getting into those areas of intelligence and so on that only the government can do. But at the moment, when we're trying to encourage and incentivize people, let's inch slowly towards an accommodation where it's clear what corporate entities are required to do for themselves, and it's clear where they can and should look for government help. That's what I would say.
Just 2 quick comments. The first one is that we do need to have partnership with the private industry. My background is from the military. I think that from the physical world, governments have a monopoly on physical violence. And we are used to having government-to-government relations with respect to military defense, cooperation, intelligence, etc. Why? Because we have the capability and we have a monopoly on the capability. But when it comes to cyber, it's totally different. Governments don't have a monopoly. You have private companies who have as much technical capability, as much intelligence, in fact, very often more intelligence than governments. So if we don't learn to cooperate with private industry, we're missing out on a huge piece of the reality that's out there. It is a challenge for governments to learn to cooperate with the private industry. We trust each other because we're paid the same way, we're incentivized the same way, etc. But we don't trust you. We are not. Yeah. I mean, it's a cultural upbringing thing which we need to overcome. And then from a small country's perspective, it's doubly challenging because many of the companies are not domiciled in Singapore. They're not Singaporean companies. They're not run by Singaporeans, for example. How do I reach out and how do I work out an arrangement which we can build that element of trust? So these are some of the challenges. We recognize the imperative that we have to do it, but there are challenges. There are the cultural instincts that government servants have grown up raised to believe in, and secondly, there are practical issues which we have to overcome. They're not insurmountable, but it's something that both sides need to understand that we have to inch our way forward and build the trust. Second one is really to recognize that there are, I think, in cyber, realities where I think there are tragedies of the commons. You can't just leave it to the market to fix things. There are things which don't naturally get fixed because there are no incentives to do it. So I think there are different analogies about public health. There are different analogies about like physical security. Governments typically will come in and provide basic level of medical coverage for the country, and similarly security for the country. I think cyber is in a similar position. There are basic things which probably governments need to step in and provide that basic level of hygiene, as it were. Just as you have in the medical arena, similarly in the cyber arena, you need to provide that. Otherwise, there will be a breakdown, I think, in terms of market forces. Having said so, there are also the opposite argument that you run the risk of moral hazard. If government fills in everything, then individuals, companies decide that they don't want to pony up on their own responsibilities. So we have to strike a balance where individuals have to be responsible for their own individual security, cybersecurity, but there'll be certain bits which I think government has to step in. And I think, again, we have to strike this balance. Singapore just recently passed our cybersecurity legislation. So hence, I'm Commissioner for Cybersecurity as well. This is a law which was just passed by our Parliament. And I'm happy to say that about 20 of our parliamentarians actually spoke up. I guess I've been speaking for too long. 20 of our parliamentarians spoke up in debate in Parliament. This is off the record, right? I'm firstly surprised that we had 20 parliamentarians who had something to say about cybersecurity, but they all said something, I think, useful, meaningful, and they understood the issue. Second, they all understood that cybersecurity is a real threat and that government needs the powers to come in. And what we have done is basically to identify the critical infrastructure, place certain obligations on them, empower CSA to investigate in the event of an incident, and to facilitate information sharing. Basic stuff. As what Kieran said, it's still a nascent area, so not heavy-handed, but we think that there are certain things which legislation can help to facilitate cooperation with public and private sector.
Sure. So I wondered how the seating plan was done. It turns out I'm on the side of people David doesn't trust, which is lovely. Just a couple of things I would say. The first, it ties to a point that David was making around the way the market functions. Because when you look at it, there's really a private arms race going on. Every vendor, and there's about 1,200 in the cybersecurity space and counting, 400, I think, here in Israel alone. You know, a lot of startup energy, but everyone's trying to be the silver bullet, and it just adds to complexity. So fundamentally, the market on its own cannot and will not work to solve this problem. It's critical that we work with government in order to do that and partner around that, and fundamentally build trust if we're going to do that as well, because we just cannot sustain that level of complexity. I think the second thing that it ties to is really around people as well. You don't have enough people. We don't have enough people. There aren't enough people to solve this problem. And so when we think about infrastructure, when we think about tools necessary to solve this challenge, we need to think about how we operationalize them as well, how we put them into effect without massive demand on human capacity. And I know some of the things that we talk about today around machine learning or AI are a bright future to help us with that. Automation is a bright future to help us with that. But there are things I think we can do today to look at being more open in terms of the platforms that we use, being more integrated in terms of the platforms that we use together, and use that as a way of reducing the burden on humankind and actually free up human capacity to focus on more intellectual pursuits in the cyber domain that computers can do today. So just to keep it brief, I think certainly the nature of the market and people are two critical challenges we've got to overcome. Thank you.
Well, thanks again for the invitation to participate. And David, I'm sad I'm also on this kind of side of the trust line. But I will say that I think things are changing in the public-private coordination around cyber. I've noticed some very positive changes in the wake of these mass outbreaks. And I'll give you two quick examples. You think about WannaCry, massive world event. It's in everyone's best interest to get it stopped as quickly as possible. Previously, we've had calls in the middle of those crises with government agencies, multiple governments, saying, hey, here's everything we know. Here's the indicators, here's the IP addresses, here's what we know. And on the other side of the phone, there would be dead silence. Maybe a courteous but there wouldn't be anything coming back. I saw a real difference when WannaCry came out, and there was really the willingness from several government agencies to also share information back and saying, well, yep, we can confirm this, we're seeing this, we're seeing this. And at the end of the day, we all have very different sensory capabilities. We have different kinds of deployment, different kinds of data. So I think that there is progress. If you also look at the technical mechanisms that we have to share, made huge progress over the last 3 or 4 years. Think about things like STIX and TAXI and SciBox and OpenC2. We have the nomenclature now. It still needs work, but to be able to share in a semi-common lexicon, and I think that's really great. And one story I would love to share with you is at the last CYBERWEEK, right? Amazing things happen at CYBERWEEK, and it just so happens at the last one, I think we had the outbreak of NotPetya, and talking about kind of self-regulation of a space. We had several of the folks from the Cyber Threat Alliance, of which McAfee is a part, and many others. And we were all huddled on a phone. I remember it was 11 o'clock at night. We all happened to be at the same party. And we were talking so openly. Wait a minute, we just got a sample from this country. Here, let me upload it into this server. And I think that there is the willingness and the openness both among security companies and among the government. We just need to get more practical about how do we do this sharing quickly so that we can avoid the next massive outbreak.
Thank you. First of all, I'm very happy to be on this panel. Actually have been in the CYBERWEEK since its inception. And you said that I'm from Israel. That's true. I'm Israeli, raised and born. But I'm sharing, I'm the global CTO of Cloud and AI Security, which means that I'm in Redmond a lot. So statistically, I'm above the Atlantic Ocean. But I'm in Seattle or Redmond every 4 weeks. So I'm in Israel, but I'm also in the US. So about this, first of all, I think it's a war. It's a war out there. And without sharing and without coalition and coalition between industry and the government, we cannot win that war. However, it's a very tricky sharing because, as you guys said before, you don't trust us. Okay? And we sometimes don't trust you, right? I'm talking about because, we definitely don't want to make... We want to do this sharing without any, not jeopardize our customers and making sure that we are maintaining privacy. So it's a very tricky subject. And I will take your analogy from my colleague from Singapore about the medical domain. And I fully agree with you, but I'll take it one step further. Think about the CDC, right? The CDC for disease control. We cannot fight diseases without the CDC. So I'm expecting the government to have in cyber something like the CDC, which means that you have the Center for Disease Control, and this is the Center for controlling threats, etc. But you cannot do it without us sharing information about it. So information sharing is absolutely a must. Okay? Trust is tricky, but it's a must as well. And trust is not just a matter of that we trust you and you trust us, but having the right technological infrastructure to enable this trust. Because sometimes we want to share information, but we want to make it in such a way that some information is kept private. We obviously, all of us want to share information about the criminals. That's a no-brainer. And that's similar to the CDC or the Interpol, etc. However, sometimes we need to share information in order to draw, for example, you talked about machine learning. It's impossible to do now to fight cyber without machine learning. And machine learning, you need a lot of data. And you want to share data without compromise the individuals. So this is tricky. There are homomorphic encryption and many other technologies that enable to do it. So in short, we still have a long way to go. I think we have gone a long way in sharing information between government and industry. We still have a lot of way to go in the technology and in the regulations. And we also have to run very fast, because the opponents, our opponents, which are the criminals, the cyber criminals, they are doing a much better job in us in sharing and in leveraging the technology, and they don't have regulation, so they have no problem. So regulation is a two-way sword. In one way, we wanted to make sure that it's encouraged the right way of sharing, but on the other hand, we want to make sure that it's not too constrained, that it eliminates innovation. So in short, we are in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you for your remarks. If I understand, it's good that you explained that the opponents are the bad guys and not the legal advisories, if anyone got it mistake. Well, and second, that we understand that we have still trust issues between the federal governments and the private sector. So I'll turn a twist in the panel, and I would like to ask you if the cyber ferry from the cyber fairy tales will now hover over us and grant everyone about 3 wishes: government towards corporate private sector, and private sector toward governments. You don't need to use all the 3 wishes. If I know you well, I think I do, you'll double it for 6 wishes. It's okay. So who wants to be the first to meet this challenge of 3 wishes?
From the cyber ferry regarding the government and...
Government and private sector issues, yes. But specific to me.
I'll take it. Thank you. So first of all, I think that I expect the government to help make sure that you build the right infrastructure for sharing, the right infrastructure for technology, very fast internet, very fast infrastructure, because if we don't have that, and this is something that each private company will not contribute, then there will be no technology advances. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you have very clever regulation that, as I said, don't inhibit innovation, and that it's risk-based, that you are creative enough in making sure that the regulation are such that they are flexible and they are not one-size-fits-all. Because one-size-fits-all means that you go by the lowest common denominator. And that's definitely bad for us.
Sure. Thank you for giving us time to think. I would say there's actually 3. The first one, and you're not going to believe this, doesn't relate to us selling more stuff, but I'm going to say it anyway, and hopefully that builds some trust. So the first, there was a note put on the screen earlier about regulation, about rules. But that was about national rules. The first one is about international rules, rules for the road. What is and isn't permissible in terms of cyber warfare, or maybe a lightweight term for that is required. But certainly global agreement, internation, on what and what is not on the table. So I think that's the starting point. That doesn't mean selling anything, but that would drastically reduce, obviously, a lot of the incursions that are going on, as long as people adhere to those rules and they have teeth. But also some of the tools that perpetrate those incursions intrusions and those tools getting into the hands of bad actors. So that would be the first one. The second one, and I will go for sales now, is money. I don't believe that cyber is prioritized at the same level as other threats. So you look at the threat of terrorism, a more traditional modern warfare, so to speak. Cyber isn't prioritized to that degree from a budgetary perspective. So looking at funding it appropriately on a national level, I think would be my second wish, and that's probably 2 wishes worth right there. And the third is really more broadly around a leveling of the playing field between those trying to defend versus those who would attack. So leveling the playing field in terms of how we cooperate, etc., and the tools that we use and how simple and effective we are in operationalizing those tools. That would be my third. Thank you.
So my big wish, sorry to hop in on you, my big wish here is that we demystify the threat. We stop spinning up and down every time a new threat bulletin or threat report comes out, and we instead put context around the threat and understand really what's truly important, what's critical. So when I think about my responsibility at DHS, it's leading the national coordination for critical infrastructure protection. That's physical and cyber. Work closely with partners across the interagency, including the Department of Energy. But the idea here is that there are going to be bad days. So we need to figure out what is truly critical, focus our resources there from a top-down national priority perspective, but it can't just be chasing every little threat piece of intel. We have to work through the rest of the risk calculus and truly understand what matters, put our assets there, and not focus on the little glimmers that are elsewhere throughout the ecosystem. Frankly, that's the biggest wish I think I could put together that's worth 6 or 7 wishes. I wish I could also change the name of my organization. You introduced me as NPPD. I will give, Max, you can't, and Sulmeyer is here too. Does anybody know what NPPD means? Don't read from your book. Yeah, the National Protection and Programs Directorate. Is that good marketing? That's terrible.
You need a T-shirt.
You know what? I need an act of Congress to change that.
We have an opening.
We've seen how that works.
Yeah, we need a ferry for that.
I do.
I think one of the big things that I'd want is to demystify cyber. I think the real challenge we have is that the experts speak technical and the decision makers don't speak technical. So you're finding that the policy makers don't understand the experts can't speak the language of the policy makers. So I find that this is a big challenge within government, across governments. It leads to all kinds of misunderstandings in terms of prioritizing it, in terms of focusing on what's important, etc. I think this is one of the big wishes that I have, that we all learn to be a little bit more bilingual, that the tech people learn to speak policy, the policy people learn a little bit of tech. I think this will help a great deal. Second big wish I have is that we truly collaborate. I think the trust needs to be built up. Then we can share across countries, share from private sector to public sector to private, with a common understanding that actually the enemy is out there. We're on the same side. I think that there isn't enough of this understanding and appreciation.
First, thanks for introducing us to the Cyber Ferry. I will definitely be using this in the future, and I'm gonna hoard 2 of my wishes just for the future now that I'm aware of the rules. But one that I'd say is a very hard one to actually accomplish. I don't know how to do it, but it speaks to David's point about empathy. It would be amazing if we could sit in each other's shoes through one of these incidents. When something happens like a WannaCry, for example, the first thing that I think about is how do we protect our customers? How do we protect society? And then those things seem simple, but they're actually quite complex. We can protect our customers, maybe through our own technology. We can certainly protect our customers better if the government takes a set of action quickly. But we have to protect our customers more than just from the infection. We have to protect them against the leakage of information that could indicate that those folks may potentially be compromised. So these are complicated things that you really, really need to have sort of empathy on both sides. And I'd love to sit on the other side of this table and say, geez, all I'm thinking about is how do I protect this country? How do I protect this nation? How do I protect its citizens? And if we could better emotionally get to that point, I think you'd find that there's a massive intersection there. And there's a great room for better collaboration once we get to that same starting point. Thank you, Cyber Ferry.
Well, everyone else has given me time to think. Unfortunately, I haven't used it well, and any thoughts I have come up with have been used up by other speakers. So, a quick point about trust, if I may, because it's come up a lot. I wouldn't want the room to take away the impression that there's some binary mistrust between government and industry. In fact, I've been in variations of this job for about 4.5 years, and I think it's fundamentally much better than it was at the start of that period. So the three wishes, endorsing what's already been said. I wish we were more successful in making it easier for people to do the basics safely. I think that would have a huge and transformative impact, and so I think we need to focus on that. I wish that it were secure our long-term industrial base for this hardware of the infrastructure of the internet, because I think that's going to be crucial to sustaining the model of a free internet in the future, and the economics of this are getting hard. And linked to that, I wish, it's more of a hope than a wish, I hope that we can, as the Western liberal democracies that gave rise to the internet, I hope we have the confidence to sustain that vision. There's a lot of quite negative talk about social harms and so forth arising from it, and there's one can detect trends towards people thinking of a more heavily regulated model, and whilst there is a place for government, I think we need to keep our eye on the prize of maintaining and enhancing the freedoms and the opportunities that the new generation of technology have given us. We need to work harder, cleverer, and more effectively together to build in safety into the next sort of generation of technology, but I think we need to keep our eyes on that prize of maintaining the free and open internet, because there are alternative models out there, and let's not forget that.
Thank you. As you were pretty good, the fairy told me she's going to come back with some more wishes, but still suspend. It's Israel. We have direct lines, to the from Jerusalem, mainly. So, if you now can have a statement of a visionary statement, I hope not for too long. At the end, what is the final picture of collaboration or a relationship between the private sector and the government in your countries or in your personal view? How it will look in a short comment or a few sentences to describe it as in the final phase. And after that, if you may, we'll open for some questions from the audience. I feel they boiling up.
So I want to get to the comment, but I have to say, Hugh, I think during WannaCry, I was on the phone with you and a couple other folks, and while you may characterize that as one of the hardest wishes, it's not. What we need is more interaction and exchange between government and industry. I was 2 months into government from a certain company that may or may not be on this panel. Like, for ethics reasons, I can't discuss it. But don't look at her. But there were situations when I could pick up the phone and call senior threat intelligence people in industry and say, hey, here's what we are seeing. What are you seeing? What do you need? And that's trust. That's the trust piece. We build that up. We have to have more free movement of capital, human capital between industry and government. We're working at it in the U.S., but we see it elsewhere. So to the comment, what's the vision? In my mind, we are working, and this is not a NATO Article 5 collective defense model, but it is a government industry collective defense, collective security model. At least in the United States, there's this pervasive idea that there's a commercially reasonable level of security where you invest. Now, a lot of the times that can get the standard model of cleanup, the basic hygiene, but it cannot necessarily defend against the advanced persistent threat. To get there, you've got to work to a military grade level of security. There is no financial model for that. That is the delta of market failure. So we do this. We can accomplish and overcome that delta by working together, and that is the model of like the Cyber Threat Alliance, companies sharing indicators together, sharing with the government, everybody working together towards the same common goal, whether it's patriotism or altruism or whatever it is. It's really just ensuring, as Kieran said, that ultimately the ecosystem is around for us all to benefit from economically, socially, technologically going forward. But it will require, I think that's truly the incentive, is everybody's going to work together to ensure that the outcome, that there is an ecosystem, in fact, to work with that.
Very quickly, because I endorse all of that, I think the utopia we would seek is one where every major company will face a series of prolific but low-quality threats, and face some very sophisticated, high-quality threats. And the utopia that we would want to see is that they're looking after all of the low volume or high volume but unsophisticated attacks easily by themselves, and so that the government can use its lawful powers to get top-grade intelligence, but we can focus that small bit of government effort on the things that really matter the most and the most persistent threats.
Totally agree. The danger for market failure is not the high end. In my mind, the danger of market failure is when you keep focusing on the high end, then you give up on the basic hygiene. I think that there is a need for individuals, companies to take responsibility and achieve that basic level of cyber hygiene. And I think 80% of our problems can be dealt with, and then we can focus on our resources on the high end. When I first took on this job, we ran an exercise in Singapore for the financial sector. So we had the main critical infrastructure banks, many of whom are not Singapore banks, but international banks based in Singapore. We're a big financial hub. When we finished the exercise, I met up with a friend of mine who was from one of the banks, and I asked her how she found the exercise, and she said it was great. So I said, why was it great? What was the best part about it? And she said that what was great was that we realized that while we may compete with one another on other areas, in the area of cyber, we're on the same side. So now we're committed after this exercise to collaborate together. I said, if that is your takeaway, the exercise was worth it. All right. I think that's what we need to do. For us, the different parts of private industry, for government and private industry, to all recognize that we're on the same side. And then I think things will follow.
So for me, the vision would be to really reduce the threat landscape, reduce the whole cyber industry, the bad actor side of that industry, and to do that in two ways. Number one is to increase the capability of every customer, every organization, every government entity, including those who have legacy infrastructure, which of course is many of them. So increase that cyber capability to such a way that they essentially eradicate some of those low-level threats, but then also through governmental international cooperation to reduce some of the more nation-state and more sophisticated cyber attacks. So essentially you squeeze the top and you squeeze the bottom as well, narrowing that band of the cyber landscape.
You know, I'd say that we enjoy a fair amount of implicit trust on the internet. And when I say that, there are people that distrust transactions on the internet, but the populace in general is trusting the internet with some pretty incredible things. Online banking, looking at your health records. Most people that are outside of security, outside of technology, don't even think about it now. They just do it. It's been kind of incorporated into the fabric of their lives. And I think the most important thing for us to be centered on is to make sure that there is nothing that we do that erodes that trust or calls that trust into question. I think there is a lot of reason to be trustful, And I think if we can center ourselves on that goal, it will lead us to do the right actions. You know, Chris kind of invoked that call that we had, and I can tell you the spirit of it was incredibly collaborative. It wasn't, well, geez, what should I say and what should I not say? It was, we have a serious problem, we're all working together, how do we get this thing done? And that is the spirit that I think panels like this help to further foster. So, thanks.
So first of all, I think I fully agree that there is a lot of trust between sharing, and again, because we cannot, as I said before, we cannot, without the sharing, without the collaboration, we cannot win in this game. I think both sides understand it, and it's essential. So two things that I would like to add. I think it's not only cooperation between government and the industry, but I also believe that vendors, that the security vendors have to cooperate. And there is no single bullet solution, and there is no one company that can have all the solution. Therefore, the cooperation between even competitors in the industry is a must. And we must understand that if we don't share this and we don't collaborate, we all will lose. And I think that one of the things that government has to do is also to encourage this collaboration between the vendors. Yes, market forces are working here, and I think that they will enforce collaboration, because companies that will not collaborate and will not share information about threats will eventually be isolated and will be driven out of the market. Okay? But government has to help that as well. And another thing that I would like to add is we have to understand that we cannot stop the progress. We cannot bring the world backwards 20 years ago without the internet, without the unbelievable sharing of information which is drilled into us and obviously into our children. And therefore regulation should not try to make it safer in a way that it hurts progress. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for us in the industry. It's a challenge for the government, and we should work on it together.
Great, thank you. And the times allows us for a few short questions from the audience. Please, can assist us. Introduce yourself, of course.
Yael Shani from High-Tech Ambassadors. I have a question, a binary question. Which is more important to resolve the trust issue? Machine learning AI that enables encryption and algorithms, morphic, all sorts of ways, like to make the information anonymous or encrypted. So both parties will not know what's in it, but can actually use the data to tackle breaches, etc. Or long-term human relationships.
I can take it. I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. You definitely need the human trust and the organization trust. And this is, it's like the Maslow theory. This is a must. If you don't have that trust, any technology will not have to resolve that. Having said that, even if you have the trust and you would like to share, and there are things that are very easy to share, and there are things that are more difficult to share, not because we don't trust, but because we have also, especially as the industry, we have the responsibility to defend our customers' privacy. Okay? And therefore, we need a lot of technology in order to make sure that we share without compromising the privacy. And by the way, it's not about anonymization, because especially if you have sophisticated AI and you want to make sure that your machine learning systems get the most learning, then anonymization is not enough. You have to make sure that the information is there, but you don't see it, which is different than anonymization. I don't want to get into all the technical details, but it's and that's why we need more advanced technology to enable it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Next question. Oh, yeah, here.
Okay, thank you. David Delon from ComSense. I see that we are missing like two angles of your vision or fair reach. One is how can you bring to the table two entities, two governments like the China and Russia from one side, and how can you bring to the table the social, like how can you bring Facebook or WeChat in the other side in order to have a global collaboration?
Who's volunteering? You can generalize the question. It's so convenient to be the host.
So it's building blocks. It's incremental. There's capacity building that you can do in other areas, whether it's not going to be directly necessarily in social media exploitation, but you have to center on something that everybody recognizes as a bad thing. So child exploitation over the internet. Everybody gets that is bad. We work closely. We work with China. We work with Russia. We work with the social media companies on child exploitation. We work with the same entities on narcotics, fentanyl distribution on the dark web. These are the building blocks, the confidence building measures that we can do across governments, across social media platforms. We're seeing it emerge in counterterrorism, things like the GIF-CT that has emerged across some of the G7 and Five Eyes countries, but also working counterterrorism across social media platforms. So there's a base from which we build from, and then you kind of continue to bump up against what is acceptable behavior elsewhere across these platforms. So it's possible.
I would endorse that, and just also say that we're not talking about. I mean, you've mentioned three things. You've mentioned Russia, China, and major, mostly Californian platform companies. And I would suggest that if the phrase "one size doesn't necessarily fit all," then that easily applies here. I mean, China will be a tremendously important challenge. It is crucial to the future development of the internet in a way that Russia, in terms of scale, is not as strategically important to the actual future of the internet. Both are important into the evolving debate about how ultimately in the long term norms are recognized and acceptable standards of behavior find some way of articulating themselves. And of course, we're living in the period where 2018 may well be the year that's looked back on in the history of this phase of technology, where the model of giving away personal data for free as the price of most internet services started to become unstuck, and we started to look for a new model. So all of these things are evolving. Then I think Chris is absolutely right that we look for areas where there is common ground, common partnership. Ultimately, and we're talking decades here, it will be against the normal course of human history if we don't find some way of accommodating societal rules, certainly within countries and between certainly like-minded countries in terms of governing this. And I think crucial to this, going back to something I said earlier, is having the confidence in countries like ours and across governments and industries, having the confidence in our own vision of what we want out of this new technology to nudge towards that sort of accommodation, but it'll be very, very difficult.
Just to put things in perspective, Singapore just hosted earlier this week a summit between the President of the United States and the Chairman of North Korea. So what we can do is we can have another summit. We'll invite them all, and maybe it'll work then.
We have time for exactly two more questions.
Okay, so my name is Inbar Bentian Regerman, and I'm heading the Cyber and the Privacy Forum of ACC Israeli chapter. And I have two questions, but I will. I think the first one is connected to the last one we heard. It's about creating clusters of governments and around what is acceptable as technology usage. We saw ZTE, we saw Iran and other examples. So what are your thoughts about that? And the next question is regarding my right to change my mind. I'm a woman. And my right to change my mind is kind of important to me. And when I download an app or when I decide what are the settings for my usage of the internet, then the result of that is narrowing the feed. And when my feed is narrowed, then there's a market failure when I cannot change that narrowing of the field because the company that is controlling the application or controlling the website or whatever is not allowing me to do that in a very intuitive way. So there are social implications to that, and you saw that in Cambridge Analytica and other cases. There are social implications to what we see over the internet, what we see over our feed. So are governments aware of that problem? What are you doing to tackle that?
We have time for answer only one of the questions with your choice.
I'll take a stab at the first one. All right. I think I'm not necessarily of the mind that you're going to get a global compact every single member nation signs on. I think where we're trending towards is kind of an oil spot model where you have bilateral engagements that leads into multilateral engagements of like-minded companies that share mutual concepts of sovereignty, values, and national interest. I think that puts you on a path towards setting what the future of the world looks like and then asks the question, are you in or you're out? And what does the future look like? We can define that collectively.
Just on the notion of privacy and settings, etc., I think that there's been a watershed moment, as per the earlier comments here from Cambridge Analytica. I think that's kind of woken the market up a bit. You've seen Apple, for example, come out and have a very positive approach to privacy, and for that to be seen as benefiting their strategy as they pursue a $1 trillion valuation. So I think there'll be some market dynamics that define what it means and how one can monetize it or leverage it as an opportunity, frankly, in the private sector. And if the private sector fails, I think we'll see more and more regulation come their way. I suspect that would be belatedly, though.
If I could just add to that second question, which I think the theme behind it is really fascinating. Very scary mechanism that we have in law, if you look at a lot of these regulations around privacy, is this notion of informed consent. Right? Did you get informed consent for the purpose that this data is going to be used for? The challenge is the person actually informed? And that's a very, very difficult question that we truly haven't explored in detail. You can give me something to read, and maybe I read it, maybe I don't read it, and I hit that I accept it, but have I truly consented? Has someone interrogated me in a way or asked me questions to make sure that I understand what the implications are? And this is far beyond the kind of topical companies and issues of the day. It goes down to even security things. Should I let this app communicate with this service? Should I allow this application to get my location? Most people just don't have any kind of understanding of the implications of those things. And I think this is an area where government working together with industry, where industry doesn't mean necessarily the security industry, but much broader, to just understand how we can get awareness of what one is actually agreeing to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that regulation not necessarily will do the job. Because, for example, if you have application that does with navigation, it makes sense that it will ask your location. However, if you have an application that does with, wine tasting, why should it care about your location? So, and therefore, a lot of it goes by the common sense. So I think that one of the things that the government, and again, reading all those legal documents, first of all, almost nobody understands it, and you don't know if to what you agree, and you don't know if it really helps you in this particular case. So I think that what the government can do is actually leverage more of education, and education has to start from very early age and educate people to really train their common sense and ask themselves, does it really make sense what this application asks me? And it's okay, I understand the risk and I will take it because it's ROI. There is a positive ROI, and sometimes it's not. So I think it's a lot of education, and again, government should definitely do that. We can help, but you have to take the stick.
I totally agree that there's a huge public education piece that needs to be done. If you look at an analogy about physical security, all of us know how to take care of ourselves, our wallets, not leave them lying around. We know how to be careful when we're walking down a dark street at night. We lock our homes before we leave them, or when we leave them. Where do we get all this information from? We got them from our parents when we were growing up. Now, when you look at cyber, we don't have that benefit. Our parents didn't teach us about cyber when we were growing up. Many of us are teaching our parents now what to do. Okay? So the reality is that we've been thrust into this 21st century life without having been brought up, without having that instinct of what. So we do need to go back, and we do need to train up ourselves, and we need to train up the next generation. So I agree that it has to go through perhaps at kindergarten, at grade school, etc. And we need to jumpstart the process.
One quick and short question.
I'm Rami Efrati. I'm one of the 4 founding members of the Israeli National Cyber Bureau. I'm going to do it very quickly because, you know, in a very Israeli way, before we started this special event, Yigal, my very best friend, came to me and said, you know, if nobody is going to ask a question, please ask a question. And I'm not going to ask a question because I know his answers. After so many years dealing with cyber, if you are going to ask a question, then what can we do? I just want to congratulate you, Yigal, and the Israeli National Directorate for a very special day and all the guests coming from all over the world. And I wish you the best. Thank you.
I'll have that question if you. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you coming a long way and staying this long here. And after we summarize quick notes to close the evening, we have a cocktail party and reception. All of you invited. Stay tuned and enjoy the rest of the CYBERWEEK. Tomorrow and next day the plenary, and big things are ahead of us. Thank you very much for joining us.
A few short notes before everyone is leaving. I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to this evening, on the stage and off the stage, the ICRC team and the INCD team, headed by Miri specifically. Please join us for our cocktail reception downstairs and enjoy the rest of the CYBERWEEK.